This is wrong. This is what is wrong with society. They just sit there now that they're in an unnatural setting, living in a house with warm heat. They like to lay around and sleep by the warm fire and sit and look at me and wait for me to go feed them, or maybe we'll go on a walk. Their whole life is scheduled and choreographed, and they just wait for their master to tell them what to do. But they're not slaves. They're wolves in their heart. Yeah, they're big, ferocious wolves. They're free, and they're not nobody's slave. They don't sit around by a fireplace waiting for more snacks. Is it natural for them to sit around and contemplate the universe and why heat is coming out of a big cast iron box? Does their mind wonder about... Ooh. Thank goodness there's no bugs around here. Just an itch. I mean, this is how people become destroyed. Just trying to make life better. See, and it really doesn't make anything better because now they're not wolves anymore. Now they depend on human beings for their food, their warmth, their pleasures, and they just become little slaves, and all they want to do is play. They don't live very long. 10 to 15 years. 20 years maybe. If they want to live 5 years with arthritis and barely being able to move. In the wild, they probably... Now, I know people say in the wild they don't live very long. Well, they get eaten by predators and so forth, but that's because man is the predator, and we're the ones killing the animals and making the imbalance. But if you went back to the original and you found the dogs, they would probably all be gray in one area and brownish in another because genetically they interbreed. Mine seem to all be black. I should start releasing them in the wild and make the wolves around here black. You see, they can be big, they can be little. That one's the biggest. Well, that's going to be like a St. Bernard. But there's different genes, but when they start breeding and breeding over a period of time, they all come out about the same. The gene pool kind of equals out in every pup, and they all become stagnant in variety. Well, hello, little one. Aren't you beautiful? You just can't think of anything to do except sit and look at me and wait for another treat. And hope we go on a walk soon, huh? Or you want to get your back rubbed or something. Is that it? You want to get up here, sleep with Daddy, sit in a chair? Normally you sit up here with me. I got all the dogs in my lap, but today I said, no, you can't get in my lap. I want some space. So now they just sit in front of me and look at the fire. Look how much bigger that Buffy is than the others. I don't know if the others are going to be really small or if Buffy's going to be huge. I mean, the others you got to figure probably medium to small. That one there's got to be medium to very large. He's like 3 or 4 times bigger than the littlest one. Aren't you? And this one, she's a little baby. She's my little baby. See my little baby, huh? And there's Snoopy Whoopy. And Fluffy. And Buffy. And little one. Oh. No, that wasn't an invite for you. That wasn't an invite. Yeah. I was looking at my phone this morning. This guy came up. He had a really good video. Might have been a doctor or something. And he was talking about sugar and how if you eliminated sugar from your diet, you wouldn't have all this inflammation, which is arthritis. That's where you usually get a lot of the pain. But you see here how we've done this? We've called it something, some particular disease. Well, it's not a disease, and here's why. If you went into the woods and fell into a pit and you broke your leg, would that be a disease? No, it's you broke your leg. It's an illness. You're ill. You're not well. But it isn't, because we think of disease as some kind of spontaneous old age pal. As you get older, it begins to have disease, which we assume is wearing of some part, degeneration from what we call some kind of weird thing we call old age. And I will tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, man was made to be forever. So what caused human beings to die? Yahweh says, you can't be in the garden. Now, where is this garden? Well, there's fruit. Okay, that's a word we have in English. There wasn't any fruit in there. Because today, fruit, what we understand as fruit, is some kind of hybridized thing or genetically modified thing. And it's far, far different than what the original pere was in Hebrew, which is the offspring of a tree. Nuts are much closer. A lot of the nuts are hybridized as well. So the original nuts weren't always very good, more like acorns and more bitterish. And you know how we ate that berry the other day off of the juniper. It is very sweet. It has a lot of sugar, but it is a thick, it's not a pulpy thing. It's more of a thick. I noticed that here when I was picking the wild gooseberries. They're not like juicy like regular berries, and you probably wouldn't like them. They have a pulpy, mushy. They're harder, less moisture, and it's got kind of syrup. There you go. Sugar's natural. No. Number one, there's a lot of fiber, and the fiber, if you break it down into all these chemicals, then yes, there's sugar. But sugar is not what's in that berry. And when I'm talking about hybridized berries, like big old apples and oranges and bananas that are way terribly hybridized bred into something that's nothing but sugar. But these berries aren't sugar. They have glucose, which is, they claim, okay, but they're really lying. They're defining things improperly. They say there's a molecule that has a glucose and a fructose, 50-50, one molecule each, and that makes sucrose, and that's what sugar is. I've tried to think of a illustration to explain this, because I know a lot of you are thinking, well, you're just wrong about that, Dave. There is sugar in berries. There is no sugar in a berry. Let's say that we define things improperly. We call this sugar, we call this protein, we call this fiber, this is water, or something like that. Carbohydrate, we got all these words. And we're convinced that these things are real. Well, they may be, but we made them. They don't exist in nature. So you can make a thing called sugar from a fruit. You can make the bottom half of a berry from a whole berry. But they don't come in nature with only the bottom half. And definitely don't come with just the skin or just the leaf, one leaf. They come as a whole thing. You cannot find sugar in nature. It doesn't exist. They're not sugar fields in Cambodia. You know what I mean? They're taking beets or cane or corn now, which is a different kind of sugar. That's high fructose. Regular sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. Well, Dave, I thought you said they don't exist. They don't. They don't exist in nature, but humans have invented sugar by dissecting and extracting something from the world. They call it isolating. They've isolated something. So now they're telling you it was in the fruit, they've isolated it, and they're going to extract it. Again, that's not true. That they're extracting is not an extraction. It is a manipulation, a transformation. They're creating something from what is existence into something that never existed, and that's called deforming. Deforming is what Yahweh did. Creation was on Genesis 1. Genesis 2 was the deforming, and he formed them from the lower elements of the ground and made them a slave and segregated and isolated every part. So please understand that carbohydrates do not exist. You don't have to worry about carbohydrates. There's no such thing. Why would you think that you could eat this white granulated cocaine powder looking thing called flour? Ha! You thought I was going to say sugar. That's all we eat is the flour or the sugar. Pasta, breads. Everything's made, and if it's not made out of what we thought was flour, was wheat, now it's out of corn or soy. If it's in a can, it's in a box. And then they add some harmful chemicals they call preservatives. They're lying. It's all designed to kill you, just as Yahweh did in the garden by saying, eat the lacham until you die. Well then, if that's a natural substance, why does the glucose cause your insulin to rise to the point that you develop inflammation, which is diabetes? And you say, well, that's a disease. No, that's caused from eating poison. You don't call eating poison a disease. You don't call the doctor and say, my child just ate a bunch of poison. He's got some terrible disease. What would you recommend we eat to counteract it and go on some medications to improve? We're going to keep feeding him all this toxins, but is there something we can give him to counteract it? Well, that could be good if you got bit by a snake and you need some counter, something that would counter the poison. Because you've already eaten the poison, you got to do something, you're dying. But you don't plan on being bitten by snake very often. So you might have some of that in the occasion once in 5-10 years or whatever, if you ever got bit by a spider or something. But that's where maybe medicine should be, to heal us when we are deficient or when accidents happen or we break our legs. Those aren't diseases, though. And neither are any of these cancers or diabetes or glaucoma. Glaucoma is caused by sugar, by eating this thing called sugar, sucrose. Okay, but it's natural. No, because the glucose and the fructose molecule they're joined together, and it takes a minute for that to separate. Saliva and digestion will separate the two. Now, the glucose by itself is a poison because it will, if you do it every day, and you can handle a little poison, you probably come out of it. But if you do that every day, you eat that poison every day, you get this inflammation, you get diabetes, you're not processing and you're not getting enough energy in the proper digestive ways, absorption, the natural process. You're getting something blang right into your bloodstream that's separate from the whole food. That's what we call a chemical. That's what we call poison, because it's not a food. A food is a whole plant with the seed therein. We talked about that the other day. So, but you see, it's much deeper than that. Now, if you go to somebody's website or a video or a doctor, like I did today, he had some very good information, but he didn't understand it all. Because he was talking about these glucose and fructose and how they are together, and so therefore if you eat sucrose, it's better than eating pure fructose. See, high fructose corn syrup is about 80% fructose and only 20% glucose. So the fructose is going to spike your diabetes because you've been eating sugar for so many years. You have no, what it does is it ruins your liver, so you can't process it anymore. It gives you inflammation. The little blood veins are inflamed behind your eye, behind the retina, and therefore you have blurry vision and it goes into glaucoma. Is this a disease? No. You ate some poison. Well, I thought, again, sucrose was natural. It's in berries. Okay, let's go further here. So we found out that if we get high fructose corn syrup, it's much worse than sugar. Why? Because in high fructose corn syrup, there's more fructose, and people with diabetes, you're going to die because you're already sick. But if you ate fructose, you would get diabetes quite rapidly, and your liver would be deteriorating very rapidly, and you wouldn't be able to eat anything then. Probably be unable to even eat milk or dairy or wheat or beans, or I hear a lot of people, don't eat beans, you can't digest them. Normal people can. Normal people can eat berries and have no problem. But berries are only available in the summer, late summer, and they don't last very long. They spoil, so people would make wine with them, or they would dry them. But for the most part, people didn't sit around just eating these old dried berries. So they didn't have a problem with it because they didn't eat very much of it. But again, that berry is not just sucrose. It's also got fiber. It also has minerals and vitamins that help digest or assimilate the sugar in the proper places. So, you see, the further you break something down, if you just eat a handful of granulated sugar, which is sucrose, all you have is the glucose and the fructose. And it only takes a minute to break it down. It goes right into your bloodstream in a big, blast. That's not normal. You're not supposed to have that chemical in your bloodstream. But if you ate a berry, you wouldn't have it in your bloodstream. It's just part of the food itself. It does its part. It can be berries can help you gain weight at the end of fall, so that you can hibernate, because you're not going to have a lot of that kind of stuff during the winter. There are reasons for berries, for sugar. Sugar isn't for people say it's for energy, but it's not for energy. Sugar is only made in this world to put on fat, so you can store something that later on during the winter you can use as energy. You can start burning the fat resources around your belly. Well, if you do that, but if you don't know what winter is because you don't live in the natural world, and so you're not going through the winter, the hardships, with no berries, no Twinkies, no soda. So year after year, you're just building up fat around your belly. You never take it off again. It can be a healthy thing to build up a little fat in the winter if you're going to not be able to eat any sugar or berries. Now, we're not even talking about sugar. We're just talking about the whole berry, which has all the vitamins and nutrients that help assimilate it into your body without causing the inflammation. Anti-inflammatories and different things. But why do we need a inflammatory and an anti-inflammatory? Well, neither one of them is an anti-inflammatory and inflammatory. They're simply foods, but by themselves and without the other corresponding part, they become a poison and they do weird things like inflame your body. They're not inflammatories. No food is an inflammatory. But if you extract one chemical from the food, it will then be an inflammatory because it needs the other part, the other half. We need the male, the female. We need the seed therein. You see how this has gotten so insane in our understanding? We can't understand what anything is, food or anything, because all this discombobulation. Because you see, you've probably heard of Chinese medicine, it's about herbs and, the male and the female, the I Ching, right? And by the way, there's an example of the Holy Scripture we already have it, but it hasn't been restored because the ruling world language is English and our science is the only thing that reigns, and we don't care about I Ching. So we don't read it. It's not required reading. Very few people have ever read the Bhagavad Gita, let alone the I Ching. So there now you're getting into some scriptures that is very important. If we don't have this information, we don't have the whole. We've got the Bible, some of the historical parts and some, lessons about love, and it's all truth. And it was divinely inspired that Paul went to the Gentiles and and why was his particular messages and so forth preserved? Because divine providence sent Paul and that teaching because it's what we needed as a Western society. But if you want to have health, because it wasn't time for health, it wasn't time for healing, that'll be during the millennial. We've got to have the restoration of the scriptures. We need the I Ching, the principle of change and changes, and the yin and the yang. Christians don't know anything about it. It's the most widely read book in China, like our Bible, that you've never heard of it. And if you would read it, you would understand, or you can watch this video, but I suggest reading that book too. It's Holy Scripture. Most people who have read it thinks it explains everything. I'll tell you a smaller one you could read that has the truth more in a nutshell, and that is Science and Health by Mary Baker Eddy. But I think if you really want to get into it deeper, you need to read the I Ching, the Book of Changes. Balance. You see, Chinese medicine is about balance. This went into Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and many people in America have thought about it, but it's just, some Hollywood, yoga stretchers in front of their TikTok screen that claims they're doing it, or Reddit, or what. They don't know anything about it. They don't understand the as above, so below. They don't understand how to apply it all across their lives, not just in their health, but their spiritual health. So yes, there is another of the Holy Scriptures that we've got to gather and put them into one, that they might be one in our hand. Well, that's a language, and that's how they describe it. Now we've got this much more complicated language. We don't just say the male and the female and leave it at that. We've got that broke down. This is inflammatory and this is anti-inflammatory. But what are we talking about? Something grows on a tree called an inflammatory. No. Yes, herbs can be inflammatory only because the actual fruit is whole and probably wouldn't be an inflammatory. But when it's cooked, you're cutting something, it's evaporating the higher parts of it. So the more subtle parts of that herb or root or leaf that you're making that tea with has evaporated, and you're surgically removing half of the anti-inflammatory part. And now all you got left is the inflammatory. Or in some cases, some herbs, you boil it and you've got only the anti-inflammatory. So that they understood was a medicine, because the herbs are for the healing of the nations. But if you're not sick, you don't need that. You're already balanced. So that's all that medicine is balance. And we could go deeper than Chinese. Instead of herbs, we could just talk about vibrations, because you could fix the whole thing with love. But yeah, inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. The up and the down, the male and the female. Think of it that way. Use another language. If you cook the food, you're changing it. We can dissect it and call it anti-inflammatory, and we'll dissect that and we'll call that acids, poisons, chemicals. We could use all kinds of words. But chemicals don't grow on trees. The only reason we ever heard of chemicals is they started this thing, a science that we have today, which isn't the true science. Because at the Tower of Babel, we had the true science. It was written on the pyramid walls. It's astrology. But it became confused, and we separated all these teachings, and we've got this thing called, we've got to learn it all. We've got to try and figure it all out through rationalization, dissection, isolating. Well, the universe doesn't exist in isolation, and we've gone so far in the wrong direction now. We've gone in an arc towards the stupidity. We've lost the truth. That we need to start understanding the universe as a whole, as a harmony. We need to have communion. That's what the Holy Communion is. We eat from his body and his blood. That is, instead of the animals and murdering, that's the bread and the wine, my friends. And we'll talk in another video more about exactly what that really can entail, but was a love feast. It wasn't the Passover. It wasn't that dead bread, the unleavened bread of the Pharisees, and the bitter herbs. But we're talking about the new wine and the first fruits, which is fresh fruit. And that's what the holy agape feast is of the Christian. But it's not, you can't just say vegetarian or whatever, I'm a fruitarian, or all of these are just gimmicks. I'm going to tell you exactly what the universe actually was. Go back to the beginning. And you need to go back to the beginning too, so you can live forever. So back to the berry. The fiber holds in all of the sugar and releases it only as you digest the fiber. So a natural food doesn't just have, one kind of fiber or very little fiber or no fiber. It always has some kind of fiber, and it'll always have, nature provides, if it's real, if you go all the way back to the real food, not the hybridized, that they designed to have more sugar, by breeding. Like my dogs, this is not a wolf. He's got color and he's a mutt still, but he's not that far removed from breeding. He's not a wolf. He doesn't look exactly like a wolf. He's smaller than a normal dog. But anyway, this isn't natural. Now, is there anything wrong with that? Well, we did it. There it is. There's nothing wrong with that. I love that little dog. But that dog's not going to fare well in nature. A wolf will fare better. They're the proper size. They have developed the ability to eat things that are in nature. They know how to do it. So anyway, the fruit, the primary thing is this fiber that holds like a time capsule in any part of the food that, remember, it's not really sucrose, the berry. And it doesn't really have sucrose in it. But it is a berry. It is what it is a berry. It's not sucrose. See, so that's why it's not poison. It's not sucrose. But when you break it down and you digest it, your body digesting and dismantling the molecules. One molecule by itself is very harmful. That's not a food. 2 molecules might be a little better than 1, because 1 you might just consider some compound or some chemical. 2 might be, I don't know. To me, that's still just some kind of chemical. There are some simple things like we said, sugar is not a whole food. It's not a berry. It's not a banana. It's not a nut. It's not a bean. What is it? It's sucrose. Well, you got sucrose in the fruit, no? No. The fruit is not a sucrose. It doesn't have sucrose. It is a fruit. It's a berry or nut. Well, it's got fiber, doesn't it? No, it's just a berry. Now, if you try cutting it in half, now you've got a left and a right. When you start off, you just have a round, whole berry. There is no left and there is no right. There's no up and there is no down, unless you're comparing it because you're on the earth and you're holding it one way or the other. But it's arbitrary. The berry is a whole food. It doesn't have just the up. And if you take the up, you're getting a down. So you're getting the whole thing. And the up and the down is not the same thing as an up. And the up and the down is not the same thing as a down. The up and the down is not the same thing as an in or an out. So the berry's a berry. It's not sucrose. You can eat berries. In the summer, at the end of summer, you can eat them so you can gain a little weight if you're going to live in the natural world and not have any more sugar for the rest of the winter, and you're probably going to eat just meat. That's the way people lived. That's the way we did for thousands of years, and evolution has made us this way. And it's probably not just, I wouldn't even call it evolution. I think that everything has existed from all of eternity. The universe has always been here. The 6 days is simply the divine spirit that migrates from the lower unto all the way up. The mind gets advanced. But there have always been tadpoles. There have always been wild lions and bears and elephants. So the universe is an ecological whole. You couldn't have flowers propagating without bees. So if the Lord made the flowers on the 4th day, or whatever it was, and the bees on the 5th day, and if they were millions of years apart, flowers couldn't have pollinated. Have they pollinated some other way? No. The 1 day is just talking about a level from lower to higher. And the fact that there are cells that are smaller than the whole body doesn't mean cells existed before bodies. Because a cell cannot exist on its own. It has to have a body. So the body always existed. The ecology always existed. But in principle, starting from the lower to the higher, you have these 6 gradations. So a berry is a berry. It's not sucrose. It doesn't have any sucrose. It doesn't have an up and a down. Now you cut it in half. Now it has an up and a down. That may not affect you too badly. But let's take it apart. Let's take the fiber out of it and just let's just take the vitamin A. Somehow we could extract just the vitamin A. We don't even know what that is. Some chemical somebody determined existed somewhere in a berry. Why do we need to know that? Why do we just make the world into berries, nuts, and leave it alone? Why do we got to dissect it further? Well, I think probably to confuse us. This is the confusion of the language that Yahweh made. It started in Babylon. That's 3,000, 4,000 years ago, before Christ. This is about the time they began to cultivate and hybridize food. Rather than eating a wild berry, they said, we'll mix this with some other berry, or we'll get the certain strains that have the bigger berry and the sweeter taste, and eventually got this big old apple. They came from rose hips. So that's a whole food, right? An apple? It's hybridized. What's the problem with it? Well, it's not a natural fruit or a natural offspring of a plant. It's hybridized so that you have unnaturally cultivated the worst of the strain and made it so that it does have more of a bottom than a top. It's oblong and it's deformed. It doesn't have much of an up, but it's got a lot of down. It doesn't have a lot of fiber. It's just got a lot of sugar. Why? That you said there was no sugar in it. There wasn't when it was just a berry. When you left it alone, it was just a berry. But now you've done something to it. You've hybridized it, and you've caused it to be deformed. And deformity is degeneration. In other words, the vibration that should be harmonious is now unharmonious and causes stress and inflammation and problems. Forget all these words, sucrose and glucose and And all these words are just, I have to use these words now because they put them into your heads. I would just come on here and tell you to eat natural, wild food with the seed therein. But because we don't understand these very simple things that I'm telling you as a foundation, it's hard to explain to somebody that there is no such thing as sugar. It is man-made. Sugar, go anywhere in the world, go to the desert. See all the sand out there? You think there's a big pile of sugar somewhere? Sugar does not exist in the universe. And I don't know why I'm picking on sugar, because it's probably the main culprit why we're dying, because we're eating almost nothing but sugar or something close to that. Even in the hybridized food, like apples and oranges and bananas and many nuts, peanuts and almonds are completely cashews. They're hybridized. A lot of people are allergic to peanuts, wonder why. They're not even the kind of beans we eat at the store. A lot of things are just hybridized. But I wouldn't think that some of those kind of hybridized foods, if it's hybridized a little, it might not be so bad. Like a bean doesn't taste very sweet. They didn't do too much to it. Still got a lot of fiber. It's still close to the natural thing. The closer you can get to nature, the better you're going to be. So there is no sugar in berries. It's just a berry. Cut it in half, now you've got an up and a down. If you dissect it down to the point where you find that there are all these molecules joined together, that's what makes it. And you cut them apart. How would you do that? You can dissect them with chemicals or your stomach acids or whatever. But once you dissect it, you break it down into all these things we've named. We don't even need to name, because everything you need comes in the form of food, which is the para with the seed therein. In nature that grows of its own accord. We don't cultivate it. It was Yahweh who made this garden. Different, not paradise, but a garden. Not Eden, but a garden that was near Eden. And in that garden, he said to Adam, I want you to cultivate it. Now, that's not the Adam in Genesis chapter 1 that was made and all the fruit was there and there was no death. I mean, he didn't have to eat anything because he couldn't die. He was an immortal being. He didn't kill anything else. Everyone shared each other's energy. So you might think, well, a fruit is a living thing, so why did he eat fruit? Well, they're not. The tree is a living thing. The fruit is the energy that he can afford to give to others. And we just rub up against other things and share their energy. Now, we have a symbiotic nature. The plants need us, and we pee on them, and we laugh and talk, and they love our energy, and they'll grow. And humans don't want to be stagnant. They want to share with the plants so they can eat, not the root, that will be poison, not the leaves. They have chemicals and stuff in leaves that once you're sick, you can use to balance yourself. If you know what you're lacking, you can go get some kind of chemical, maybe that. But it's gone to the point now where you go to get pills, and all these pills are lies. They're synthetic, and they're not good for you. They're damaging. Don't eat vitamins. And the minerals you get aren't any good because they're water-based, and you pee them out. You got to have fat-based, animal-based minerals and foods. But anyway, back to this thing. There is no sugar in berries. Because you're eating a whole food, all the molecules are combined. And as your body assimilates them, it takes maybe hours, long several minutes to break it down a little bit, and even hours to completely break it all down. And it's done in a very systematic way that we don't need to understand. But everything is distributed to the proper places. It's a natural process, and we will live forever that way. But humans don't, because we don't have access to actual natural food, because we live in the city. And we don't any longer want that because we're addicted to these poisons like heroin. You go in the city, you find people that live on heroin and beer or wine or sugar, Twinkies. They live on exclusively. They only live maybe 70 years and they die. 80 years. Humans can live forever. But the last half of their life is excruciating pain. They have so much inflammation, they're barely surviving. And maybe once in a while they get a real piece of food and it kind of helps them a little bit longer, but they just live sort of in pain on intravenous, life support basically for the last several years of your life. That's not living. And the pleasure is not pleasure, it's pain. It's death. And so Yahweh said, cultivate the ground and it won't produce for you. Only thorns and thistles. You will die. By the sweat of your face, as a slave, you will work 6 days. That's a commandment. You must be a slave. Till the soil. He told Adam, till the soil. And the ground is cursed for thy sake. He made Adam a slave to the ground. And the woman became a slave to the man. And the serpent, which is the animal nature, was cursed on its belly. It didn't have wings. It wasn't ethereal. It became carnal. And Jesus partook of this sinful flesh without wings and died on a cross. And that serpent was lifted up as Moses lifted it up. And whoever looketh upon him will have eternal life. Because that which is made alive is not made alive unless first it dies. You must take up your cross and follow him. And who is that Christ? That's that anointed. The Spirit is anointing, and the Spirit is mind. You see, there's another one of those words that we have that means nothing to us. Spirit. Because in English, you would, if you were to translate it, you would have some word like mind. Now, we understand mind. We think and we make thoughts. It's the spirit that is eager. The flesh is weak. It's the spirit that is active. It's the spirit that's the creator. And that's not some invisible thing that we don't know what it is coming from the Lord. It comes from the Lord because we are made in his image. We all have this one thing that's called being, mind. The reality. So spirit is the wrong word. We don't know whether it means an attitude. Oh, he's got the spirit of fear. An attitude of fear or the disposition? The Spirit came upon him. Well, what does that mean? He got a higher mind, the holy, sacred mind. And that is our mother, Sophia. It is so appalling to me that the world is so ignorant and we do not understand anything at all. And the Spirit is mind. That's your inner mind, the invisible part. We all have it. Adam, he was they breathed into Adam the breath of lives. The breath, the wind, the spirit of lives. And he became an immortal soul, a living soul. What is living cannot die. But he also was split in his psyche between the Adim. Adam became Adam and Eve. Well, Adam was also taken from Adamah, which is the word for earth. So Adamah was the mother. So Adam actually came from Adamah. But then Eve came from Adam. Well, only because she was half of it and they cut it in half. And now the conscious mind is separated from the higher conscious mind. And so the conscious mind went through this maze of knowledge and learning in order to become one with her husband again. And the restoration of all things will come. But Yahweh said, I want you to till the soil, and it won't produce for you. You'll be a slave. You won't have any reward. And by the sweat of your face, you will eat your processed food. The word there is lachem, or burnt, cooked, dead food, which is not even food, but dead substance, until you die. So that is what death is. Death is eating what is not food. And you say, well, okay, I eat natural things. I'm a vegetarian. That won't work. Because if you're a vegetarian, you're probably eating broccoli or, even kale or any of this stuff is hybridized. Those foods like broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and whatever comes from the mustard plant. It's a wild plant. They began to cultivate the mustard plant thousands of years ago into all kinds of weird things. You say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's natural, Dave. Well, it isn't. It doesn't live in a natural sense. An apple, if gone and left alone for 100 years, you'll go back to that area where the apple trees were, the orchard, and all that will be there is a bunch of crab apples. And eventually they will go back to the rows. Everything will go back to the way the Lord made it, eventually. And that is how he made it. That's the paradise. We don't get addicted. We don't live on heroin. We don't live on beer and die at 70. But we live on food with the seed therein, living food. So this dead food is the worst of its kind. But what do we use to make the dead food? Things like hybridized grains. Why is it bad for you? Just because it's hybridized. It's natural. Well, if it's not genetically modified, but it's still not natural because we selected and bred selectively. And we took the sweetest ones because there might supposed to be a little sugar or a molecule that will become what we call sugar if it's broken down improperly. It isn't really a sugar. It didn't exist as sugar. It was part of something else until you broke it down or unnaturally bred it by selecting certain genes. If you do it in a laboratory or do it by years of selecting the genes by breeding, it's the same ultimate thing. It may be a little easier in a laboratory to get it done quicker. But hybridizing and genetically modifying things are basically the same idea, except that the worst part is that genetically modifying has come to the point where they're genetically modifying it to have poison in it, literally, in order to kill you on purpose. They say they're trying to kill the bugs so it'll grow. But that's ridiculous if that was what their real intention was, because the hybridized and genetically modified corn that they make, if it's grown it's so starchy and so much sugar that it's pulling all of these nutrients out of the ground in such a terrible way. And they have to cultivate the field and dig it up. And so the soil doesn't have bugs. Everything's dead. They put all these chemicals all over it. But the corn can thrive because they've genetically modified it to live in that environment. But you ought not eat it. It's not a food. It's hybridized. So yes, hybridization can cause damage, can be very bad. An apple, you could probably eat one. There's a lot of fiber. It's like a berry. I don't think there's anything wrong with eating berries and bananas and apples. Even some of the hybridized ones. I mean, apples were eating them before Christ, 1,000 years BC. They were hybridizing. I mean, I don't think they had some of the crazy, very sweet ones we have today. They may have been smaller and a little bit more tart, but apples probably aren't going to hurt you if you eat an apple. But you're supposed to eat these kinds of fruit when they're harvested in the summer. I mean, if you really want to eat right, I wouldn't eat any of these hybridized things. I'd go right back into nature and live off the land and eat mostly meat, fish, birds, because fish and birds were made on the 5th day. So therefore, you could not offer fish or birds as a sacrifice to balance your sin. I mean, if you sin, somebody's got to die. So a life for a life, you kill the animal and you live because the animal dies, and you eat his flesh and wear his coat to survive. Well, that's temporary. You're still going to die. It's better to go back to the original way, where the animals and the plants and the humans lived in harmony, and we ate the fruit, which is the offspring. We didn't eat the seed. The seed poops out on the ground and makes another plant. You just eat the seed, the fruit with the seed therein, because then you know that it's living, right? It's like you go to the store and you want to know if it's sealed. Otherwise, if it's not sealed, somebody could have contaminated it. Well, anything you eat that doesn't have a seed in it has already been contaminated. It's hybridized in such a manner that it no longer even can produce its own self, let alone give you nutrition. So there is no sugar in berries. There's only berries, and there's a lot of things that we could probably name because now we've dissected all this and we've come up with names. This is fiber, this is sugar, this is protein. Well, we don't need to know all that. We need to eat berries only in the summer because that's when they're available. We need to eat fish. We need to eat mussels and clams and things that we can find in birds. And for thousands of years, man ate cattle because they would go and mow down the grass and the leaves, and they could chew their cud, and they had a way to digest this food that we couldn't digest, the roots and the leaves, and turned it into something like milk and cheese. I think originally we used cows for milk, cheese, and butter, and chickens for eggs. I think in the millennial, we'll eat fish, and we'll still eat butter and eggs. Jesus said eggs were a perfect food. So, sucrose, when, like I say, it doesn't exist in nature. You don't go to a tree and find a handful of sugar falling off the leaves. They're only leaves and berries of some kind of fruit or nuts. Nuts don't have very much. If you break it down, there's almost no sugar in there. Once it's, you can't somehow dissect it into some separate molecules and end up with some of these molecules that they're claiming are sugar. I'll just say whatever these little molecules are, there's just molecules that are fine for you as long as they're in a food with the rest of it. Then your body can assimilate it, and you need it that way. Actually need the sugar if it's connected and it's eaten at the appropriate times when it grows. Because it is designed, berries and fruits are designed to put fat on you. And we're not designed to dissect all the sugar molecules out of a beet and make this crystalline heroin cocaine stuff that it's addictive as and put it in all of our foods. Think about what you eat is almost entirely some kind of bread, whether it's corn, soy, wheat, and it will have loads of sugar. I mean, what did people eat in 1800 when they first came over to America and they were going west? They took bags of beans. That was the only thing they had was any good for them. Bags of ground coffee, bags of tobacco. They had big bags of flour, white, processed, bleached flour. That is poison because it's nothing but starch. And they took gin or whiskey or something, or I don't know, mostly gin, I think, in the early 1800s. And bags of sugar. Bags and bags of sugar. And then they ate some meat. They had some nutrients because they ate a lot of meat. But they used to take the flour and the sugar and ball it up in little patties and make cakes and pies and have them for breakfast, right? Biscuits or pancakes. Sometimes we'd have it for lunch. Even with dinner, you'd have a bowl of beans and some meat. That's why they were as healthy as they were. The problem was they ate a lot of tobacco and they took the berries and made them into wine or whiskey or whatever, and that's not good for you, the alcohol. So there's plenty of things that they were doing that was killing them. But now we've come to the point where we're not eating any meat. The average person eats a hamburger at McDonald's, which has got no meat in it. Like, it's just gristle and bone and cartilage and some fat, and then they mix some other crazy stuff in there, some flavorings or whatever. They're allowed to say 100% beef, but it could just be a byproduct of some kind of, originally it was part of a cow, or they They've taken all the bones and the skin and the hide, and I don't know what they're doing, but it isn't really meat. They lie about a lot of things. But people don't eat any fish, rarely. Oh, I eat fish on every Tuesday, every holiday, It comes around on the 6th month of every... No, you don't eat very much fish, do you? Except for when you go out to Denny's or wherever you go to, a lot of people eat out every day. And I used to do that. I lost my health because I grew up in a normal family. We had donuts for breakfast, pancakes, right? It was cereal. I never got much milk. I usually growing up, we'd have to have powdered milk or canned milk poured in our cereal. It was terrible, so I didn't eat much cereal. I didn't usually eat much in the mornings unless it was pancakes being served or donuts or something, and I ate a lot of that. And so over the years, I got bad eyesight, losing my hair, arthritis. I didn't realize all of this until like 10 years ago, and I'm learning every day. But all of this stuff that we eat from the store in a box or in a can, it's all poison. It literally is not just, it's not so good for you. It's literally poison. You cannot eat sugar every day and not end up with being overweight, fatty liver. Well, these are all words that, I got a fatty liver. You don't understand. You're dying. Forget these words and terms. If you eat sugar of any kind, people are eating agave. Oh, it's a health food. Well, if you have diabetes, you might not raise your blood sugar as much because it's only got 20% glucose and 80% fructose. But it's closer then to high fructose corn syrup. The problem with high fructose corn syrup, because it's mostly fructose, not sucrose, or not glucose. It's like 80, I think it's mostly fructose. That's why I call it high fructose. Well, first of all, it's made from corn, genetically modified pesticides, whatever's in there, But, and the hybridization or the genetically modification of it is that it's so sweet. But it's also, the glucose and the fructose molecules are not even linked together. So immediately when you eat high fructose corn syrup, you don't even have a minute for it to assimilate. It hits your bloodstream immediately, bypasses every mechanism, and it's literally nothing but pure poison. That's what you're getting in your sodas, in your cookies, in your breads, in every pasta. Everything you get at the store now is made from that. Unless it says, it's a health food, just pure sugar. Oh, now sugar's a health food. Because it doesn't have that awful... Oh, even better, it's molasses, right? Or maple syrup, or honey. Guess what? Honey, maple syrup, molasses still has 50% glucose and 50% fructose, but they're linked together, and if it's by itself, there's no fiber, you're not eating a fruit, there's no minerals and vitamins and all of these things. It's not a natural plant. It doesn't have too much sugar to start with, right? And it's got a lot of fiber, and there's some bitterness in there and some other nutrients. Then you can eat it, and in the appropriate time of year. The prophet Joseph Smith said that we were to eat these things in their season as they come to be growing in the wild, not something that we make in Colombia and ship it to America for the winter. We got bananas in the winter now. So, high fructose corn syrup is the worst thing you can eat, and it's in everything. And it's not just bad, it's deadly poison. You won't live over 70 years, and the last half of your life is going to be crippling pain. I mean, these people running around today at 20, 30 years old with crippling diabetes, crippling arthritis, crippling, and they might still live to be 60, 70 on some chemicals or, to counteract the poison. But they're overweight. They can barely move. They don't get outside. They don't get no sunshine. They're dying. Well, if you ate right, you might live 100 years. So what? No, if you ate really right. It isn't right to just be a vegetarian. Oh, I'm eating right because I'm vegetarian. What are you eating? Hybridized cauliflower and oranges and bananas and probably a lot of bread, pastas. I used to be around Adventists off and on. I seen them up in Idaho a lot. And I'd be a bit to their get-togethers, and it was just, they're vegetarians. Oh, they don't eat meat. But look at all this pasta and breads and cakes, sugars. They're dying. They don't know. They don't care. Oh, it's our law. We don't want to eat unhealthily, so we don't eat meat. But wait a minute. Nobody said, we got to break down everything in the universe. Nobody mentioned that sugar's not good for them. It just didn't become a thing. Mormons have the word of wisdom that Joseph Smith gave them, which is to eat meat in times of winter or in famine. When you're hungry, right? But when in season, when the fruits are in season, you should eat them. Well, they'll just excommunicate you for drinking a soda, even though they own the soda companies, or smoking a cigarette, even though they own the cigarette companies. Not kidding you. But they eat sugar and pasta and all this stuff, and they don't do anything that the actual word of wisdom tells them to do. They just ignore. It's like ignoring. It's like Christians. They ignore the scriptures and make up their own law. Well, we don't keep the law, but we just make up our own laws. We'll disfellowship you because we don't like you and you don't agree with us. You've got big spots on your dress. Why? It's blasphemous. You've got to leave now, right now, out of our presence. But it is insane. I don't know if you guys understand how insane this world is. We are eating things that are not food. Powdered. You get a spoon, you open the sugar, you get a big several tablespoons of sugar and dump it all over your sugar cereal. It's already got sugar on it. Right? Or think of how much sugar you're pouring on it. This is grams and grams. If this was $50 a gram, you wouldn't afford it. By the way, why do you think they want you to have pot and booze? You can buy that in any town. Usually, even at Walmart. Around here, you can buy it on Sunday, which is a lot of places I've been, you can't get booze on Sunday. But, because they're not giving you, it's actually illegal in most places for you to have sativa. That's the actual plant that gives you mental enlightenment and can heal you. But this other thing, in indica, it is something that works more on the GABA centers and makes you tired and sleepy, just like booze and alcohol. And they want you to be sleepy. Go to sleep, little children, and don't wake up. Goodbye. You're dead. So they want you to be asleep. They don't want you to be enlightened. Some people say, well, I like indica better. Well, that's because they just want something to put them to sleep. They just want to go into a little drowsy, dream and just go to sleep. And sometimes we do need that. Opium's very sleepy. It causes sleep. And you need that to take pain away and stuff. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of thing. But when you need that kind of thing, if you're sick, you might need to have a painkiller. Thank goodness we have painkillers. In nature, they're prevalent. You think aspirin was invented in some laboratory? It comes from plants. They extract the thing that works and now it's not a food. But anyway, I see we're well over an hour and we've rambled on enough about this, but Friends, don't eat sugar or white flour for certain. And start eating as much food that you can find, learn about it, get back to Eden, that book, and start learning about the natural way of life. I guarantee you'll love it, and you'll live longer, and you'll be happier. I'm David Vose. I'm going to go ahead and go, guys. I got to get some wood cut. It's going to snow tonight, it says. We'll see you guys tomorrow. May the Lord bless you. Have a good one.